On this first Sunday of Advent, we are entering a season of expectation, anticipation, and hope. Christians took an event that had to be pretty uneventful in a real time, at least on a global scale, the birth of a child. It's not uneventful to the family, but uneventful to the globe. But they made that event something transformative. In real time, we know a baby is coming, but we know nothing of what the child will become. The Jews were waiting for a Messiah, expecting and hoping such a leader would appear. Many years after Jesus was born, Christians declared he was the Messiah and created a celebration of the event. The 4 weeks leading up to the birth of Jesus are now recognized as Advent. When I think about that time period, Herod and the Roman Empire were controlling the kingdom, dividing it up and counting the people. The people were divided up so Herod's family could maintain power and control. Jews and Gentiles separated, different geographies ruled by different sons of Herod. As I started to think and write about expectation and hope at this time of year, my mind could not extract itself from the war in the Gaza Strip, the brutal attack by Hamas, and the brutal response by the Israeli military. They would not leave me. The follow-up around the world has been pro-Palestinian rallies and a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Islamism. Innocents are getting killed simply for who they are, simply for existing. Israel wants to eliminate Hamas. Hamas wants to eliminate Israel. And when I got the readings you were suggesting for today, many of them had bleak overtones to them. And I wondered if others of you are feeling the same way, a world in conflict, a nation divided, and big, seemingly intractable issues all around. How do we anticipate hope for a better world in the midst of all this hate? Well, we have to have hope, or we will fall into apathy and thinking it's too late to act, or falling to premature despair can be used as excuses for doing nothing. The future is not yet written, so let us not despair. It seems in times like these, we have to find somewhere to turn for hope. 10 hostages a day provided some hope for me, but that sure didn't last long. There are things we can do. We need truth-telling. We need to create ideas that become irresistible. And we need to see each other as human. Rebecca Solnit, in her book Hope in the Dark, writes about this kind of division and conflict between a very powerful empire and tribal people in our current era. It was 1980, and Spain was proposing that October 12th, 1992, the anniversary of what was then known as Columbus Day, be made into a global holiday of sorts through the United Nations. It would be called the Encounter of Civilizations. But when the idea was suggested, all of the African government representatives walked out of the assembly in protest. They saw the relationship between slavery and the taking of indigenous lands. It didn't really receive a lot of media attention at the time, but activist Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz started to get the word out through hard work, speaking engagements, conferences, and newsletters. Solnit writes that Dunbar Ortiz said, "Word spreads. Ideas begin to shift. It is exactly what gives you hope when you see this happen, when you see how hungry people are for the truth. Truth can build a sense of hope for justice and change." Solnit also tells the story of the Inuit, who were supposed to disappear, according to Empire, Canada this time. The land they lived on was 3 times the size of Texas and was declared a wasteland. But they won their homeland back from the Canadian government. It is now named Nunavut, or maybe it's always been named Nunavut, and it's autonomously governed. Other wins by indigenous populations have also occurred. Non-indigenous people have been declared extinct, history erased, and rights extinguished, and yet they are still here, still telling the truth. How does it happen that people can make changes like these without wars? Solnit asks, what bridges that space between hope and change? What is the scale of our imagination and our will? What sustains the people whose uncountable small acts shifted the world, especially since almost no small act has a reward in itself? From what vantage point can you see such incremental, such incomplete, such extraordinary transformation? She says these stories of Columbus Day and of the Inuit and many more are evidence of the power that culture has to shape politics, for profound change happened as much through knowledge and imagination as by legislation. Legislation only comes about when powers that be find this other version of history and justice irresistible. The Inuit people inspired the birth of another future. Another world is possible has been the rallying cry. It is another future drawn from another past recovered despite everything. The sidelong way of change starts with a critique of the past to a new path into the future, from ideas and words to land and power. This is how history is made, out of such unlikely materials and of hope. Solnit said. Truth, a critique of the past, ideas and words to make this new version of history and justice irresistible, ongoing push in anticipating and expecting justice someday. We can also anticipate change and hope through our spiritual work. Buddhist Pema Chodron, in her book When Things Fall Apart, writes about servants of peace, imagining a place where we could go to learn the art of peace, a boot camp for spiritual warriors. She said, instead of spending hours and hours disciplining ourselves to defeat the enemy, we could spend hours and hours dissolving the causes of war. The work would help us go beyond the limitations of dualistic views and become flexible of mind, somehow avoiding becoming holier than thou. This idea is not to save the world, but instead to wonder about the people of the world and how our own actions might affect other people's hearts. How does one find hope when the threat is that your entire culture will be exterminated or erased? Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, writes of his time in a Nazi concentration camp in World War II. Frankl, a Jew, was arrested by Nazi German authorities in 1942, along with his pregnant wife, his parents, and his brother. Frankl's father died in a ghetto in Czechoslovakia en route to Auschwitz in Poland. All the others in his family except Frankl died in Auschwitz. Frankl's book doesn't solely focus on the horrors of Auschwitz, but instead on the things that people did to find meaning in every moment. He draws on his theory of logotherapy, which he began developing long before the Nazi aggression began. Logotherapy posits that meaning and purpose in life are key to personal happiness and well-being. While imprisoned, Frankl applied his theory to his own situation, and it helped console not only himself but his fellow prisoners. He wrote, "We had to learn that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life, and instead to think of ourselves as those who were questioned by life daily and hourly." Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and in right conduct. In other words, it's connection and empathy. Frankl was thinking about and caring about the people around him in spite of this global thing going on. And he found what kept people going was meaning. Meaning comes from care and empathy. I saw an interview with an Israeli whose cousin was a hostage in Gaza. He was obviously worried about the hostages, but he said when he sees what has been done to Gaza, he sees it as yet another horror. He was disturbed by the mutual hatred. We need to stop killing each other. And while personally touched by war, he found meaning enough to have empathy for the Palestinians too. It can only stop when people see each other as loving, caring human beings. And what does it mean to see each other as human? It means learning the truth and telling the truth everywhere and creatively imagining a different world. It comes from right action in our treatment of the person in front of us, learning to empathize, recognizing suffering and injustice. Scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson said, "What history has shown is that when you are granted a perspective bigger than the one you had been harboring, you end up thinking differently about the world for the better." That, my friends, is where hope comes from. That is the wisdom to know that a better world is possible, and that will take us all in loving relationships to speak it, to imagine it, to bring it about. And here we are, near the end of 2023, finding that meaning in the face of great upheaval around us. It is easy to fall into despair. The way out is through finding whatever we can around us and among us that gives us meaning. It is about care, empathy, relationships. It is a lot like being with you all today. It gives me great comfort to know that you are here and that there are UUs all around the world who are caring about others, deepening relationships, and still expecting and hoping for justice and beloved community. It is the way we keep going. We keep going together with love and care that stretches beyond ourselves. May it be so.